Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Katie and I head up the marketing team here at SEIB Insurance Brokers. Hopefully most of you will have heard of us. We offer insurance for pretty much anything equestrian, livery yard insurance included, as well as horses, horse trailers, horse boxes, freelance grooms, instructors, the list goes on. So if any of you need any insurance, please do get in touch with us. Tonight we are hosting a webinar with Ali Dane and Cheryl Johns from LiveryList and the Yard Owner Hub. This is part 2 of our successful business models for livery yards webinars, and I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Cheryl and Ali.
Thanks, Katie. Some of you will already know me. I'm Cheryl Johns. I run LiveryList and the Yard Owner Hub. So basically what I spend a lot of my time doing is trying to support yard owners, trying to help develop the industry and improve the awareness of what would be industry expected best practices. So I work with lots of equestrian organisations and associations and charities such as the BHS, ABRS, Equestrian Employers, SEIB and Red Wings to try to help raise awareness of the issues that yard owners face, and in time hopefully the cogs are slowly turning to try and help improve the value of the industry and make it slightly easier for the business owners than it is these days. This second one that we're doing this evening, I'm going to have a chat with Ali. It's going to be quite an informal chat. Ali owns Hurston Dressage. She can introduce herself to you all in a second. You're all got your cameras turned off and you're on mute, which makes things a bit easier for us. If you do have any questions, I don't know if it will necessarily warrant any questions, but if you do have any questions that pop up, feel free to put them in the chat, and we can address anything that might be relevant at the end. Grab a pen and paper for anything that might be useful to jot down. If there is anything that we don't have the time to go to at the end, or something that perhaps is more specific, then Katie, who we've just met, will be sending a follow-up email out tomorrow, I believe. And then anybody that has any specific questions or points they'd like to raise can obviously reply to that and be pointed in the right direction. So on that front, I will now pass you over to Ali, who can introduce herself.
Hello, hi. So yeah, I'm Ali. I have run Hurston Dressage and Eventing for, I think it's 18 years this year. So yeah, it's been quite a while. It's been a bit of a journey, and in amongst that, I'm also a List 3A judge, dressage judge, a level 3 coach, and I also sit on the board for the Equestrian Employers Association, the British Grooms Association. And I also work for retraining of racehorses separately as well on the education side of things.
Excellent, thanks Ali. So we're just going to have a chat about Ali's experience running a yard. Obviously she's very well connected in the industry, and through her roles with equestrian employers and running the yard, and Ali also has a business background which she can explain to you in a second. It puts her in a really good position to be really understanding of the compliancy and business management when it comes to running a yard, with all that experience she has as well. So Ali, first and foremost, what was your background before you had Hurston Dressage, and what was it that inspired you to take on having a yard yourself?
So actually, if you ask my grandparents, they will always, and they're not horsey at all. Apparently when I was about, I don't know, 10 years old, I told them that it was my life's ambition to have a livery yard. So apparently I've always wanted to do it. I didn't know that I knew what a livery yard was when I was 10, because I come from a completely non-horsey background. I did go to university and studied a business management degree, got a very nice little kind of grad job into the petrochemical world, and corporate essentially, and then I did have a couple more kind of corporate jobs, but when I finished university, I think it was the year that I finished university, I set up Hurston Dressage and Eventing, and took my first livery up here in Oxfordshire. I originally came from Surrey, went to university in Brighton, and then moved up here, and signed my first livery contract in 2007. So yeah, quite a long time ago. And then worked. I've kind of always done something alongside the livery yard. So whether it was the corporate job when I just had literally like 2 or 3 liveries, and then finished in the corporate world completely in 2014. Yeah, it was 2014, and then and started coaching full time, and doing more along the judging route, and then and that education route, I suppose, has led me to retraining of racehorses, overseeing their whole education program. So yeah, it's busy, but I still have the yard, and I absolutely love having people on the yard, and building a community. Essentially, that's what keeps me doing the livery side of things, is the community that you're able to build as a yard owner.
Do you find that, obviously coming from a business background, one thing I always find is a lot of yard owners are not business people, so they do it because they love horses, not because they have any experience of managing people or managing a business. Do you find that that's advantageous to you? Obviously, it's not going to make you impervious to things like prices going up and difficult clients, but you find it kind of, you can deal with things more with a business head than perhaps some other yard owners might be able to.
I mean, I think it's looking after the numbers has always been something that look, it's a challenge for in any business, but specifically in the equestrian world. I think it's always looking after the numbers has been something that I've always been interested in, which I think helps, because I know an awful lot of people just aren't interested in the numbers side of things. But I suppose possibly as well because my father was so against me going into horses and said that there's no money in horses. I just kind of wanted to prove him wrong, and made my entire life all about horses, and was able to, yeah, I've been able to make a livery yard pay for the last 18 years. And I should admit now, so initially I didn't have full-time staff. I do have I've got 1 full-time member of staff now, and I've got 1 part-time member of staff. So I am not on the yard all of the time, but it took me quite a while to be able to get there, to make enough money to pay the staff correctly, to do, you know, and then still to make a little profit to put back into the yard. And then mainly for, I suppose, a bit to flex other muscles is why I've got the other, you know, I went into coaching and things, and to keep my brain busy. So it's not necessarily that the livery yard has not paid, that I've moved into other areas. It's because I want to keep my brain busier, I suppose. And also I broke my back in 2013, so I can't do all the mucking out and everything. But the business side of things I quite enjoy. I enjoy sitting down and looking at I love a spreadsheet. I love a spreadsheet. And that's you know, and I'll go and make sure that I forecast, and I'll do SWOT analysis, and whilst you don't need to be as in depth as probably what I do, and it's maybe just because I'm a bit of a nerd, I think the business side of things has helped hugely. Sorry, that's a really convoluted answer to, yes, the business side of my past has definitely helped me run a livery yard. But I think it's such a difficult balance, because ultimately we're all in this because we love horses, and that's what we get a kick out of, is helping the horses and dealing with the people and helping them and promoting good horse welfare and all of that kind of, that's why we do it. But I think for me, I also like the ability to run a proper business.
Yeah, it's much better. Some people, I guess it's weighing up. Some people it's more of a hobby than a business, and for other people it's a business that can earn a bit, and for some people it's a complete, you know, it's their sole income perhaps that they have. Yeah. So obviously it's been quite a changing landscape for yard owners over the last 2 or 3 years, with price increases, and then there's obviously a lot of questions around the social licensing aspect of the welfare. and just generally, as you know, it's not regulated at all, the livery industry as a whole. Obviously there's things that people should adhere to, but that perhaps don't always, and we'll touch on that in a bit. But have you found that you've been affected by these things over the last couple of years that have made you change how you do things or had to reevaluate things?
Hugely. So I'm in the midst of having to change my business model completely. So the last time I changed my business model was about 8 years ago, I think. It was certainly pre-COVID. Yeah, maybe 7 or 8 years ago I changed my business model, and that's basically what's worked for within. Obviously I've put prices up, but we've basically had the same staff patterns, the same number of horses, the same land, everything has kind of been the same. And then a series of unfortunate events has led to the farmer next door. So I own a certain amount of land, and then I rented another 20 acres from the farmer next door, and he recently said, look, we need to look at the price of what you're paying for the rent, and actually overall, when push comes to shove, the bottom line of the new price, it just didn't make sense. We weren't reliably going to be making a profit every month, and I am not willing to take the chance of, just the other day, our Polaris Ranger that we do all the we do the poo picking in the fields with, we use it to harrow the arena, we use it to hay everybody out in the fields. The radiator started leaking, so that's going to be a bill, and I don't want to get to the stage where I'm dreading a bill coming in, an unexpected bill coming in that I just can't pay, because that's like my nightmare. It makes me feel quite ill not being able to pay people. So I had to have a drastic rethink of what my business would look like, and I've had to we've gone down from 16 horses to, actually we're going to go down to 8 horses, so literally halving the number of horses that we've got on the property. And it's been really tough, actually. It's been really, really tough. And one person that I had, and I basically, how I did it was the last people in, so the people that have come to the yard most recently, they're the ones that are kind of on the chop list, and the ones that have been here the longest are the ones that were able to stay. But one of the people that I did give notice to, and I've gave them 3 months notice that that would be handing back the land, and there would no longer be a place for them on the yard. And I was really transparent about it. I explained my reasoning. Out of all of them that I had asked to move on, one of them, she just completely, I'd had a really good relationship with her. She completely lost her marbles, but it's something that was out of my control, and she upped and left in a week. And actually circumstances have changed with another couple of horses that were on the to stay list, and they're now leaving. So the owner is moving and taking those horses with them, and so there's 2 spaces for two of those horses that were under the chop before. They're now on the to stay list, and they're very grateful. And because I explained everything to them originally, they were absolutely fine, and they were laughing and joking about staying here until literally midnight on the day before we gave the land back. But this one lady just upped and left within a week and was like, okay, bye, see you. Unfriended me on Facebook, hasn't replied to any of my messages. Just so weird that she's just taken it so personally. But then other people have been absolute, and I'll probably stay friends with them after they've left, but the whole process of changing your business model when you're a livery yard owner is so it can be, I mean, I was just in turmoil about the whole thing, because it affects your clients so much, where to put their horses, and their relationship with the livery yard owner, and whether is their horse going to settle in a new place, all those things that you're just you're literally turning their life upside down, really, as far as their horse goes. But I had to put my business first, and I had to put myself first, And I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep ultimately with that, knowing that there was no margin for error, literally, like very, very little margin for error in terms of nothing going wrong, because we all know that stuff goes wrong when we're managing a livery yard, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's why I always say that there's a real guilt culture with yard owners when it comes to putting prices up or saying, oh, we're putting this in the contract, we need to do this rule, or this is a field you can have. And I think that's because it's quite unique from other like service industries, because it's not just you and the livery client, it's you and the livery client and the horse and everything else that goes with it. So it's not as simple as like just having, I don't know, someone that does garden maintenance or comes and does your cleaning, that you literally just, that's it, and it severs the ties. There's a lot to think about, because you know, horses are people's, or some people's, complete lives, and they base their whole life around going out competing at the weekend and, you know, doing this, that or the other. So I think that's why it has to be like a fine line between having a business head and then also having an understanding that there's got to be some level of sort of empathy of horse owners when you need to tell them things are changing. And I think some yard owners don't have the balance quite right. But like you say, transparency is key. And for those that don't know, in 2023, Ali won the SCIB Full Livery Yard of the Year award, and I was on the judging panel for that. And one thing that really struck me about your website and just the way that you present the business is that you're really transparent. So if you go on your website, you have literally everything there, like your biosecurity policy and all sorts of things. And I don't think I've ever seen any other, like, if you look at it, it's definitely a business person. But I don't think there are many yards that for some reason are willing to give away that much information. So to me, it was like really belt and braces, that you're showing that you're compliant, and you're showing that you have an understanding of how to run the business, and that there's client care and the horse welfare as well. Do you find that kind of sets you apart, or that's something that helps you attract or retain clients, that you have that level of transparency and sort of professionalism from you know, when they first look on your website and first inquire with you?
I'm not sure that a lot of my clients actually initially, bar one of my clients who's actually a chief financial officer for a massive corporation, she's probably the only one that commented on it recently. But the but to this, I'm not sure that most of them were aware before coming here to look around or engaging with us in any way. I'm not sure that they were aware that all of that was there. However, because that is how I have built the business, it has become a culture within everything that we do here. So my staff are aware of every single policy, because I do have policies. I've got policies and processes, and I've got like files and files up here of my policies and processes and risk assessments and all of that kind of stuff, because I feel like we're providing a service. We are effectively a service industry, so I think that that's vital that we provide a good service, and in order to do that, I feel like we need procedures and we need policies in place, and processes to follow, so that all my staff are on the same page. And that in turn creates a culture of first of all, transparency and communication, because those are two things that my staff know I value. But it's just management of expectations, I suppose. So, and the professionalism behind it. So we have a worming policy, which says that we're going to worm count 3 times a year, and we'll worm once a year, or as and when needed. Like if we've got a new horse that comes in with a high worm count, then we'll worm it. And that's on the website. And so people, and then we stick to that, and we do as we say we are going to do. And so our clients' expectations are met because of the policies that we've got in place and the procedures that we've got in place. But also I know where I have what I've promised and what my duties are, what I need to fulfill effectively. And I think that that's where they come in. I don't necessarily think that it's a huge selling point for people, because look, I mean, most horse owners just don't care. But what it helps with is the overall culture and managing expectations.
One of the biggest problems, especially that I have seen recently on the Facebook group, is yard owners saying that if they have to put their prices up, they're outpricing themselves. And sometimes I think, I never understand why yard owners feel there should be this plateau of pricing. So if you're in this town and you offer this livery with this facilities, you should all be at the same price. It's obviously not the same, because if you wanted somebody to come out and do plumbing or landscape gardening or go to a hairdresser, there's obviously different tiers that you would get, you know, from cheap, just do the job and everyone's happy, right up to really high end. And I think a lot of yard owners struggle with the concept of that. They don't understand, like, if you go on your website, it obviously seems a very well run, competent business. And I personally, if I was looking for a yard or any service, I would rate that higher than perhaps somebody that just didn't have any mention of that whatsoever. So do you find, because obviously where you're more of a competition yard, and you're quite a small yard, and you're probably on that higher price bracket compared to some yards, do you find that you have a particular way that you attract the right sort of livery client that appreciates the service you provide for the price you charge, or do you find still that you have to really do a lot of vetting before letting someone come on the yard?
Yeah, I think I always vet someone before they come onto the yard, just because I know the kind of community I want to build here. I think the thing that attracts people here is that we know our USP, we know our unique selling point, and I think that's what yards need to make more of. So our USP here is, and I really hate saying this because it sounds like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but it's the fact that they've got access to me. So they are predominantly now dressage riders or eventers that want to improve their dressage. I do still teach a little bit of jumping. I try not to, because it turns my hair grey and I don't want to start dyeing my hair too early. And I've had far too much experience of teaching pony club children, but that's essentially why they're here. And we've got a whole range of people. We've got people who are competing at kind of into one, thinking about going and doing a Grand Prix, through to I have a lovely old chap who's been with me, it feels like forever, but I think it's about 10 years he's been here, and he's 77 this year. And he's on his 4th horse. He has this amazing knack of turning any horse really naughty. So we do like a 2 or 3 year stint before the horse just goes, I know that I can just canter down this hill going home, and starts to take the mick a bit. But both of those people stay here because through price increases and through, all of the challenges that we go through with turnout and the weather and staff changes, they stay here because of the USP, i.e. that's access to me. So, and it's not that I teach them all the time, it's the fact that I can go out onto the yard and I'll tell them, the old chap, I just reminded him that actually he should be using his hacking bridle instead of the snaffle, because said horse does get a little bit strong on the hack, on a hack, and he's not able to stop it. So just little things like that I would remind him of, that maybe, I don't know whether one of my staff would notice, but I would always notice. And then through to the lady who's just, will go and do a Grand Prix this year, looking outside and saying, oh yeah, that passage was looking really good, your piaffe could have been a little bit more forward, stuff like that they have access to me. And I think what yards I'd love to see yards making more of is thinking, what are we really good at here? What is our USP? What can we do really well that other yards maybe can't? And then we sell that. We sell our USP. We make more of our USP. So maybe it's amazing hacking. And so you really advertise the fact that you've got this incredible hacking, and actually somebody is available if you want to guide, you know, not necessarily even a guided hack, just a hacking buddy to go on a hack with if your horse isn't particularly good at hacking. Have you got the most amazing arena with a sound system and mirrors and all of that kind of stuff that doesn't ever flood, or an indoor arena? You know, just work out what, and it might not even be facilities, it might be something as it might be something to do with the people. So you might only have qualified staff, which I think is a whole other thing, but you might only have qualified staff. So, you know, and one of your staff members might be really, looking with my ROR head on here, one of your staff members might have worked in racing and really understand former race horses. And it could be anything. It could literally be anything that your USP is. Because look, again, nerdy business person, I did a course 2 years ago with a lady who does she sells online courses effectively, and it's this idea of one to many, and she basically says, if you have an idea, if you have an area of your own area of expertise, but there are lots of other people out there doing the same thing, work out what makes you, work out what makes you special and why you should be out there selling your thing, your course, your product, your whatever it is, because there will be a space, there will be a niche there for it, but you've just got to find it. And it might be something to do with the area that you're in, or the maybe it's on, you know, you can do really good advertising online. There'll be something that you can choose within your offering that can set you aside, you know, set you apart from the other yards, and then that's what you base your business around. And yeah, it might be something as simple as just being able to cast an eye over, if you're a judge or a coach or something, just being able to just cast an eye over a rider in the arena, which is basically what I do. And then at the weekends I teach them occasionally. But yeah, it's finding out what your USP is.
Yeah, I definitely find that. I think especially when on the face value of it, so many yards can look the same, as in, oh, we're just a DIY yard or we're just a full livery yard. And I quite often get emails and messages from people saying, you know, I really struggle because such and such yard almost next door is undercutting, and I don't think that their welfare standards are great, or I don't think they're insured, or I don't think they're paying business rates. And
so tell everyone that you are. So yeah, tell everyone, exactly. Look, we are fully insured, and our welfare of our horses, like welfare is the biggest. Have you got a winter turnout? Amazing. Like, push that. That's your USP.
Yeah, and then when they say, oh, and I think, oh, I'll have a quick little snoop on their website or on their Facebook page, or if they have a listing on LiveryList, and you look on it, and there's about 20 pictures of themselves riding, which is always a little bugbear of myself, but like no pictures of the facilities, and they'll just say, you know, like full livery yard near Chelmsford, and that's it. And I think you really have to try and big yourself up. And like you say, I totally agree on finding your unique selling point or your niche that you can fill, because virtually every business can offer something that those in the surrounds can't. And if you make yourself stand aside from those other yards, that's how you can justify the way that you charge things or the way that you do things slightly differently. So I definitely always think that yards should have a look at how they advertise and what they're advertising, because like you say, so many, they don't mention anything about welfare standards. When I was on the judging panel for the SCIB Awards, it really did amaze me the number of people that didn't mention things like horse welfare or staff experience or yard routine, or any sort of what would be businessy considerations when we were looking at their websites. And actually, if you're a complete outsider looking in, they may well know that they have all these things in place. But if you're actually someone that likes to do the due diligence when you're looking for livery, which, let's face it, it's not a huge amount of horse owners, and that needs to change as well. But you need to give people that information so that they can then compare it to the other yards that perhaps don't have those things, that aren't insured, and then raise that question, as in, not this yard's expensive, but this other yard, oh, it's cheaper because it doesn't have X, Y, and Z. And I'm totally with you on that whole USP. But I think some yard owners just think, oh, that's too businessy, I can't do that.
Yeah.
But it literally is something that it just takes thought and literally putting some words down. So when it comes to best practice, and you've touched on employment, so I'll ask you about that in a minute. But when it comes to best practice, if somebody wanted to try to improve not the financial value of their yard, but to just make their yard appear better, so like more professional, more compliant, like they're actually a business, what would be your recommendations, you know, knowing how well the policies and the procedures that you have in place? What sort of things would you suggest that are kind of a quick do for a yard owner that wanted to give themselves a bit of a sort of jazz up?
So the first thing I would say to do is work out what you've got to work out what your expectations are of a livery, and then think about what your ideal client's expectations would be of you. That is always the starting point for me. What are the expectations? Because if you're it's according to what you're offering, essentially. So if you're putting out, and there's so many different terms, I suppose, to do with, so full livery to one person might not be full livery to another person, and part livery the same. I think the only one that really is the same across the board is DIY, because even assisted DIY means something different. So first of all, assess what your expectations are, what your capabilities are, and understand what the very baseline is. It's always easy to add things as long as you've got capacity. You've got to work out what your baseline capacity is and what the baseline expectations are, and then build your policies and your procedures around that. And that, just having them written down, even if you don't have staff, because when it was just me on the yard, I mean, I was a bit sad, but I used to sit down with a glass of wine and work out exactly what policies and procedures I would follow on my own, so that I had more, because I had quite a lot going on in my life in terms of working in logistics for the petrochemical company, and I was trying to event something like 5 horses at the same time. So I had to have process and work out exactly what I needed to do for which horse that I had on livery and when, and make sure that I wasn't letting anyone down. And just by doing that, and I had it up on I didn't have it on my website at that point, I had it on the wall in the tack room. So, and just by doing that, my couple of liveries that I had felt more secure, I suppose, and that our expectations were matching. And it's all to do with transparency and communication. I know I keep on saying transparency, but it absolutely is. And because what I think we've been guilty of in the past is not sharing the burden of how much it genuinely costs to keep a horse. And I've done an exercise in the past when I've had a bit of moaning on the yard about prices going up and things. I've done an exercise in the past where I've got a nice little space that I can bring them all into, and I've gone through exactly how much everything costs. And actually they can see that I'm not skimming off the top and, you know, going off on holiday to Barbados all the time. I'm not using it as a cash cow. I'm putting all the money back in so they can see. And I know we shouldn't have to do that, but it's part of, I suppose it's part of the community that I've built here. And that, I think the transparency is key to building a nice community where there's trust. And actually trust is probably the best. So you have to be trustworthy, and I know that our clients have to be trustworthy as well, then, and they're often not, but even when they go low, we have to stay high. We have to keep our standards up here. We have to maintain, because it's a business at the end of the day. So the first thing I would say is set expectations. Make sure that you know what your expectations are. The second thing I would say is just, and this is really easy to say, but really difficult to do is to go and walk around your yard as if you've never seen it before. So I try and do that at least once a month, and you know, and things start to jump out at you. And actually, for all he's not horsey, he's super critical. My dad is brilliant at doing that, and he's like, he notices things that I'd never notice, just because I get blind to them. And yeah, and that should help you form a plan for what you maybe could do without spending an awful lot on your yard. And look, I was saying earlier, my yard is not fancy. It was built in the 1970s for not very much money at all, and we do an awful lot of patching up, but we do, it's super clean, it's super tidy. We make sure we adhere really strictly to biosecurity, and because I've got the policy about it and everybody knows where they stand. So yeah, and I think although it's not a fancy yard, it doesn't look shabby. Does that make sense? And it's not, you don't need to go out and spend loads of money on like a freaking solarium or, you know, that kind of stuff. Yes, it's a nice to have, but that's not going to make someone stay. That's not going to make, and it also uses so much electricity, and it winds me up when people leave it on. But you know, it's, I think, yeah, so looking around your yard for really, like, with a fresh pair of eyes essentially, or go and grab someone that might be super critical and really annoying but actually probably has a really good perspective on what could be tidied up. And I'd just say again, if you have staff, just make sure that they are on message. They know, and sorry, this sounds really businessy, but make sure they know what the deliverables are, because if they don't know what they're supposed to be delivering and what you've agreed with your clients, then you're going to have those awful messages saying, oh, this member of staff didn't do this, or that, you know, my horse wasn't brought in at this time, or my horse didn't have his feet picked out. And then again, that's to do with setting expectations, making sure that your staff are in on the whole thing as well, is vital. But it's all of that together should create a culture of trust and transparency, I suppose. And I think if you can build on those things, then actually people, because things do go a little bit awry every now and again, we all know that on yards, you know, no 2 days look the same. Horses like to go through fencing, or, you know, colic or that, and staff don't turn up. But hopefully people are a little bit more forgiving of the times that goes wrong, that, you know, the times that go wrong, if you have built a culture of trust and communication, I think. Yeah.
So yeah, it's tricky balance. So touching on staffing, obviously you're on the board of the Equestrian Employers Association. You have been for a few years now, I think. And you're an employer. Obviously there's lots of change. The national minimum wage is going up again next month, and obviously there's always constantly things changing in terms of employment legislation and different rules coming in and ways that things had to be processed. Do you find it harder now to employ people or to manage, you know, when it comes to staff management and affordability?
Affordability, yes, 100%. It has, look, I used to have 2 full-time members of staff, and that was when I was teaching full-time, and riding an awful lot. So I'd have 1 member of staff mucking out, 1 member of staff getting my horses ready for me in the morning. I'd ride, and however many, 5 or whatever, and then go and teach all afternoon. So I wouldn't be mucking out at all. But I think it was just after COVID that I had to go down to, so I stepped in. So I'm half a person on the yard essentially now, and then I've got another part-time person who's on the yard. And between the 3 of us, sometimes I have an extra person in as well, depending on if I am away with ROR or something, or if I'm out teaching, whatever. But yeah, I'm generally that half a person. I still pay myself for that work, but what I don't have to do is go through, I'd say that the other part-time person is actually a freelancer, and she changes her hours according to what she can do in that particular week. And because I'm the other person, I can work around her. So if she comes in on a Monday one week, it doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to come in on a Monday the next week if one of her kids needs to be taken to the doctors, or that kind of thing. It's definitely, and that relationship to do with freelancing is really tricky, but vital that we get it right. But my full-time person, and he's on a good wage, and at the moment, again, this was one of the considerations that I was thinking of when I was changing my business model. He's actually going part-time when I change over in May, April, May time, to when I've got rid of the extra horses. When we go down to 8 horses, he's going part-time, because the numbers just didn't work. And again, I'd hate to get to the point where I wasn't able to pay him. That would just be the worst for me. And yes, it's gonna, we're gonna be essentially we'll make up a full-time person between us. But yeah, it was something that I thought long and hard about, and don't get me wrong, I'm very lucky that I'm able to keep him even on a part-time basis, because he is just brilliant. He's so reliable. He's been here for 4 years now. Generally, I keep my staff for quite a long time, but yeah, he's been here 4 years, and he's just brilliant. So I really didn't want to let him go, and I almost said to him, look, I don't care what I have to pay you, please just stay. But luckily he's found another job, another part-time job that he can fit around us. But yeah, it's so hard. The one thing I would tell every yard owner to do that maybe isn't sure about employment, look, I'm on the Equestrian Employers board, and I am not always sure. So first of all, be a member of the Equestrian Employers Association, but HMRC do some really useful webinars that I've drawn on quite a few times. There was something to do with benefits, employee benefits, that I had, and I had no idea how to fill in this form. And obviously one of these forms was due, so HMRC did a webinar on how to fill out this form, and that, just things like that. HMRC are sounds really silly, but they are actually quite good people, and they do want to work with us. They're not the evil tax people, and they will tell you how to get it right, and there's plenty of information out there if you look for it. It's not going to they're not going to smack you in the face with it, because there is a certain expectation that if you're responsible enough to be employing, then you're responsible enough to be employing legally. And if you don't know the answer to something, then you should go and look for it, because we all have access to instant information now. But they do, use those webinars. They're all free, and you can ask questions, and honestly, they are brilliant. The Equestrian Employers Association, goodness, big up the Equestrian Employers Association, and the British Grooms, because they do so much work. I can't even explain the amount of work that they do to help support both grooms and employers. The scope of their remit is just enormous, and I don't really do very much for them. I definitely don't do enough for them. I wish there was more that I can do. I'm quite happy that they do roll me out occasionally to stand up in front of people and talk. Last year it was the Equestrian National Equine Forum, and I think we're possibly, I can't remember, there's somewhere else that I might be rolled out to talk to people, but yeah, it's a vast undertaking that they're trying to do, like professionalizing the equestrian industry and trying to move towards it being a place of good and positive employment, instead of being like my dad and going, oh, there's no money in horses. There's no money in horses if we don't charge properly, but also if we don't pay people properly. And unfortunately, by saying I can't put my prices up, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that we can't pay our staff, so then they don't work in the industry. So it's all interconnected.
Yeah, I definitely think good employment is key as well, because I think somebody that's watching the webinar, Jules, has also just said she's seconds joining the EEA because they do so much and they've had really good advice. But I totally agree, because I work with the EEA and we do we kind of swap articles bi-monthly, and some of the things, even though they're not massively long articles, I think, oh, I didn't know that. So like, long gone are the days of being able to employ someone and just go, oh, you can have your accommodation and we'll knock off this, and you can have your horse on livery and we'll knock off that, because that's, you literally can't do that anymore. It all is so specifically how it has to be done. And that's a really good tip about the HMRC doing webinars, because I didn't know that was a thing, so I'll put a link to that. But yeah, the thing that I think is, if you're treating your staff fairly and you're employing them properly so they are employed, obviously that's giving your livery clients consistency as well, because they know that they're going to have Joe Bloggs, for example, doing their horse week in, week out, knows their horse's do's and don'ts, how they need to be handled, as opposed to the yards that struggle for whatever reason to retain staff, or just have constantly changing freelance staff, or just some randomers that they've recruited off of Facebook. And it's just, I think it's really important for yard owners to make sure that they're recruiting properly. But one thing that always really baffles me is that, like you're obviously saying, which because you come from a business background, is that you're paying yourself. And there are so many yard owners that don't actually factor in their own. So they might be working like 50, 60 hour more week on the yard if they're, you know, a sole human running a full livery yard, for example, or even if they've got parents or children or partners, they don't actually factor in a cost for themselves. So that's great, they're covering all the consumables and the overheads, but then they're not actually earning anything for the time that they're on the yard. And yard owners, I always think, they say, well, what should I charge? And I think, well, not the minimum wage, because you are the business owner. Like, you're bringing all your skills and all your expertise and your knowledge and the facilities and everything, and you want to charge yourself out at £10 an hour. It just doesn't make any sense.
And it's not a minimum wage job. I'm really sorry. To know if a horse is colicking or not, or to know if a horse has done a leg, or, you know, or to know the exact feed a horse should be. It's not a minimum wage job. The amount of knowledge, it's a highly skilled job. So I don't know why there's this perception that actually we should all be paid minimum wage or less. Why is my knowledge not worth more than minimum wage when you can go and stack shelves for, and that's absolutely no offense to anyone that's stacking shelves, but you need to know significantly less in order to stack shelves than you do if you're running a yard, and that is one of my massive bugbears. Sorry, just while we're quickly on the subject of employment and paying people, I made a note earlier to say one of my biggest bugbears is the term working pupil. That really gets my back up, because
it doesn't exist anymore, does it?
It's illegal.
It's not a thing.
Yeah, it's not a thing. It's not a thing. So even I saw oh my goodness, who was it? I think it might have been someone like Andrew Nicholson advertising for a working pupil. That is not a thing. You can't provide training in exchange for work unless you are in an official apprenticeship. So, and that needs to be with an official apprenticeship provider. You can't just say, oh, I've got an apprentice. It needs to be through Haddon Training or Keats or one of those ones where then you actually have to put the time into the training of the person. It's not just cheap labor. You actually have to sit down and make time to train that person, and support them in any way that they are needing that. And I've had it so often, people asking me, oh, what do I need to do to get a working pupil? there's no such thing. There's, I mean, and it really gets my back up seeing really high profile riders offering working pupil positions. It's not a thing. And that was kind of the theme of what I said at the National Equine Forum.
Because people don't understand now that there's so many regulations. So when I was younger, like in the mid-90s, and I was learning to ride, it was literally like a free fall for all at the riding school. Yeah. So you went up on Saturday morning and you were basically just left there by your parents. You just hassled everyone on the yard all day. You led people that could ride even less ability than yourself around and out on public roads and what have you. And you're responsible for tacking horses up when you're like 11. And that's gone. Like that's not a thing anymore because it's regulated so much. But so many yard owners as well don't realise that even if you have you know, your children or your parents or freelance or volunteers, there's so many regulations. So you should still have like employers liability insurance for anyone that's working on the yard under your instruction, which would actually in theory be anybody, even if it's a freelance groom, because you're still telling them to go to this place and do that task. And that's something that I think is like, I don't know, 6 one and half a dozen of the other, that some yard owners don't know and other yard owners know but avoid in order to keep costs low. And because people always say, oh, I don't need employers liability because I just use freelance staff, but that's not a thing. You still need it if you employ anyone. I think there was one case recently that I saw. It actually was a yard that I used to be at, which shocked me a bit when I opened it. But it was, they'd had somebody doing some maintenance on the yard who had, I think it was just a family friend, and they'd fallen off of the roof of the stables and seriously hurt themselves. But they were a friend, so obviously they didn't have the right insurance for them because it was just a mate doing a job. And this guy was seriously like life-changing injuries, and they had to pay like 100 and something thousand compensation and fines because it was all non-health and safety executive compliant and they didn't have the right insurance. So I always say to yard owners, it's fine to be underinsured until there's a problem. So like until you don't have liability for people that are working for you, or until you don't have, you know, the right policy limits for horses that are on the yard. So I think viability, that there has to be a fine line between your yard being viable, but also your yard being run in a manner that is not going to turn around and bite you on the butt when something goes wrong. So from your point of view, how do you manage viability for your yard, you know, when it comes to weighing up your outgoings versus charging the right amount?
I guess I kind of have a list of non-negotiables that if I want to run a yard, that's what I need to pay. And in fact, I don't know, maybe it's upstairs. I initially don't tend to work on spreadsheets. I write everything down, and I know the costs of the non-negotiables, and then so regardless of how many horses I have on the yard, those are the fixed costs, the non-negotiables. So the insurance, the water, the electricity, the mortgage for the yard, so because it's a commercial property, the yard is a commercial property, so there's a commercial mortgage on it. What else? That's basically it. And then there are the things that I could possibly, there is some wriggle room on, so I can sometimes squeeze a little 50p off here and there from my partner who supplies the hay and straw. Not particularly successfully all the time, because he does sell hay and straw commercially, not on a vast scale at all, but it just means that yeah, I can kind of bring a little bit of the cost down, and then I have to say, I obviously staff wise, what they are paid is non-negotiable. They are not on minimum wage. I would not pay them minimum wage. I would always pay them more. And then obviously all the costs associated with that, so that, you know, pension and making sure that what you pay into their account every month, you can still pay the PAYE and the national insurance and the pension and then your tax at the end of the year. So kind of you've got an idea of that as well. Excuse me. And then the working out where you could save money. Do you need to get your fertilizer from the same place every year? Is there somewhere else that you could get that slightly cheaper? Can you hunt around for your bedding supplier? That kind of thing. And then once you've done all that, I suppose, due diligence, then you think, right, how much, divide that by the number of horses, so that your non-negotiables, divide that by the number of horses and work out exactly how many. So I have a spreadsheet with for the amount of hay I use, work out the average per horse per month, the amount of bedding I use, and then on that one I actually have it exactly how much each horse uses every month, because some horses will go through like 7 bales of bedding and one will have 2, bales of straw. So yeah, I work out how much each horse actually costs, and then go from there. But there's no simple science to it. I wish there was, but ultimately I have to have, once I've taken every single cost into account, so that is maintenance as well. So how much did I spend on fencing last year? I mean, it always depresses me, because then they go and break it again. So and that's how I'll overestimate everything, and then I work out how much I am charging and what the buffer is. And ultimately, if I don't have a buffer of at least £1,000 a month, so I need to be bringing in more, and that's after paying the staff and after paying me and all the stuff, then to me that's not viable. And that might sound, I was talking about this with a friend of mine who runs quite a big livery yard, and literally all the way through the year they have a buffer. They've got a margin of about 50p. And when I said mine was £1,000, my non-negotiable margin was £1,000. They were like, "What?" I was like, "No," because ultimately that is what I feel like I can then put back into the yard. So we put turnout pens in last year, and what else did we? Oh yeah, I astroturfed all of the walkways and fronts of the fields for this year, and it meant that I could spend a bit of money on on redoing little bits of the yard. Again, not I could buy new rubber mats or for one particular stable, or buying some new feed bins, and I'm not scratching around trying to find that money. And ultimately, again, at the end of the year I can pay my tax.
Yeah, I think that's things that a lot of yard owners don't do, or don't realise, or don't properly calculate, is the fact that you shouldn't just be covering your costs, as in it's a business. So if something happens, like, the arena needs a new surface, or like you say, you want to make yard improvements, especially if you're trying to add value and stand out and have a USP and be a bit different, it's having that extra buffer on top to be able to then reinvest in the yard, but also as like a little security buffer as well for the unforeseen costs. So we will wrap up in a second. I've got 2 more questions for you. One is, obviously you have good eyes from within the industry, so through the BGA and the EEA and having a yard, and all the other things that you're involved with. Do you feel that, although lots of people are trying to kind of raise awareness of the standards that there should be in livery yards, do you find, or do you think that associations and the industry as a whole could do more to promote to the, what I call the end user, which sounds really businessy, but to the horse owners, so that they understand when they're looking for livery, that they can tell the difference between 2 yards that are the same cost, but one that is really not a desirable yard by any stretch of the imagination, but it's cheap, versus one that's a bit more that it offers the standards you would expect? Do you feel that there could be some, I don't know, some way that the industry could communicate that better to horse owners?
Yes, is the short answer, for sure. And again, this is basically what I said when I talked to the National Equine Forum, is that we need to professionalise the entire industry, and that's and that I think you and I first talked when we were talking about legislation for livery yards, however many years ago that was, and that's still a theme that we are working towards. Me slightly less. It's in a more convoluted way through welfare work with retraining of racehorses now, but also certainly through involvement with the BGA and the EEA. It's something that is coming, I think, the legislation, and ultimately you'd like to think that would lead to a more professional standards. But my feeling is, I think change needs to come from within. I think they can legislate, which I'm for. I'm absolutely pro legislation, by the way. But I think they can legislate and be forced into professionalizing the industry and lifting industry standards and raising awareness for people who have horses, and maybe choosing yards and things, that raising awareness amongst the consumer. I think at the moment it's being done entirely in the wrong way, unfortunately, and the tail is wagging the dog. We're reactive as opposed to being proactive in this space. So what I mean by that is we almost wait for a welfare concern before we then go, oh right, we need to do that in order to prevent that happening again. And in some cases it's like unavoidable, because you just couldn't have foreseen that particular circumstance. That's how surprises happen, is you just haven't foreseen that circumstance. However, I think I've got to speak carefully here. I think so from a welfare perspective, we are often shouting about the wrong things on social media, and actually to an awful lot of people outside the industry, we're just tearing ourselves apart from within. We're not helping the situation by posting all these awful things. Yes, we need to raise awareness of welfare concerns, but there's a way of doing it, and whilst social media is very good for raising awareness of certain issues, if there was, I suppose, a more professional and maybe legislated method of reporting welfare issues and things, then maybe we would follow that. I don't know what the answer, whether people actually would go down that route and be slightly more professional in how we deal with issues within the industry, or whether it's still always going to end up on Facebook. My feeling is that, look, we're dealing with, in yard owners, we're dealing with a demographic that likes to go on Facebook and likes to complain about things, and things are they're never going to be good enough. But I think if we, as an industry, from within the industry, we can professionalize, whether we have legislation or not, things can only get better.
Things are definitely turning. So I think probably most people that are watching know, but I run a Facebook group, and I think there's about 3,400 yard owners, and I check everyone when they join. So in theory, everyone should be a yard owner. And it's a lot of repetitive questions on there about things like insurance and employment and contracts and serving abandonment and so on and so forth. But so I set that up in 2016. So it's in its 9th year now. And definitely since I launched the proper version of the hub back in 2020, because I can now give access to these resources and point people to places like the EEA, and like the webinars that we do on insurances with the SCIB, so on and so forth. There is definitely a slow turn of it now becoming peers trying to educate other peers rather than me just signposting where people should go or what people should do. There's definitely been a change, I'd say, in the last 2 to 3 years of someone putting it, oh, why do people bother with the livery contract? And rather than just me bleating on or linking to an article I've written, you'll get 10, 15 yard owners saying, well, you know, I thought that until such and such happened, or actually it's really easy. So I do think there's a lot of change coming from within the industry, which I think is quite a good way of doing things, because if yard owners see that their peers and others in their area are making that the standard, and it should be, for example, people asking, why don't you have a livery contract, than rather than why do you need to have a livery contract? There's definitely a change, but I would really like it to happen a bit quicker.
Yeah, and I do think, I absolutely think that we could have more support from certainly governing bodies for, and I work the most with British Dressage, and actually they are really hot on all of this kind of stuff, and it is, I agree, and actually, Cheryl, do you know what, you don't get enough praise for everything that you do for yard owners. You absolutely don't, because it's incredible what you do, and you don't charge a penny for most of it. So yeah, I think honestly, it's you should be hugely, you are basically the reason that the livery industry is turning around, I think. And it is, I get it, it's like turning a huge boat very, very slowly on your own, like against the tide and against headwinds that, you know, you've got so much being thrown at you constantly as a livery yard owner, that I do understand that you know why you see the pushback, and why people might not want to do things in a certain way and maybe professionalize everything that they do. But I do think that the industry could do a lot more to support livery yard owners. It's kind of like the Wild West, isn't it? Like in survival of the fittest. But yeah, but I would like to see more done. More support for certainly the business side of what we do. And anyone can go to Hartbury and do an equine business degree or whatever, but not everybody has the resources to be all the time, or the inclination to be able to do that. But I think the more I know that Horse and Hound have run quite a few articles. I've spoken to them an awful lot about it. They love a bit of a rant. If you get on the phone and you have a bit of a rant, then they generally turn it into an article and then quote you, which has happened a few times to me. But yeah, I think it's got to become just the norm for us to be considered professionals.
Yeah, definitely. Right, last question. It's not a question, it's a tip really. So for the yard owners that are watching, what do you think, or for any yard owners, what is the top thing that you think yard owners could do towards securing the future of the industry? So something that they should take stock of, something you've mentioned, or something with the way that they manage their business that you feel could be not the key, but as in could play a part in trying to turn the industry back in their favour?
Understand your value, like work out what your value actually is within the industry, because I don't think we place enough value on ourselves as people. I've said it before that we undervalue people hugely within the industry on so many different levels. Work out what your value is. What do you bring personally to the industry? Because undoubtedly everybody has something that they can bring to the industry, and then that ties into working out what your USP is. But don't ever think that you're just a livery yard owner. because we do so much. It's such a, for every time that you're that people go, oh my God, you work with horses, that must be just so amazing, and aren't you lucky, and that there's always, for every one of those comments, there's a day where you're trudging through the fields in the mud, and you've got all your water, you've got your third lot of waterproofs on, and you've lost a welly back there, and the horses that you're leading are like flying kites, and you're trying to get them in before the next named storm comes, and then all the fencing blows down, and your day just gets worse and worse. You've got to remember your why you're doing it, but also what you are bringing to the party yourself. Yeah, and never undervalue yourself so much that you don't pay yourself. You have to, don't put yourself out there day in, day out, break your back. I literally did break my back doing someone else's horse. Don't break your back for someone else's horse, and ultimately someone else's happiness, that they can just move on like that, because we've all had it, haven't we? We've all had it when a livery that you actually really value and you think that they value you, they just up and leave, and they don't care, they just go, and they don't look back, because the grass is always greener on the other side, even if actually technically it's not, and the yard that they've gone to is a bit manky and they don't have good worming policies or anything like that. Never forget, I'd just say never forget who you are and the value that you bring, basically.
That's really good, because I think a lot of yard owners unfortunately end up feeling a bit downtrodden by running a yard, and that's not obviously the way it should be. Thank you, Ali. It's been a very nice chatting to you, and I think it's really good to have yard owners like you that are happy to speak with the openness and frankness about running a yard and how you do things and what your opinions are. It's very good. Right, I think I'll probably hand back over to Katie now, if she's there.
Yes.
There she
Was
is.
you going to say something else, Cheryl?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that I will send Katie. So for the Yard Owner Hub, literally this week, I've just launched it's called the Back to Basics Guide, and it's a series of 10 very simple, concise guides that kind of cover everything that I've spoken about with Ali this evening. So there's ones on biosecurity, employment, insurance, client management, all sorts. So I will send Katie a link so that anybody that's interested, that wants to go and have a look, because it ties in with a lot of what me and Ali have spoken about this evening. So I'll send that to you, Katie, to put out.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, as Cheryl mentioned earlier, I will send a follow-up email to everybody who's in attendance tonight. It will include our contact details. If you've got any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, please do fire them over, and myself and my colleague Georgina will distribute them to Cheryl and Ali and get back to you with some answers. So I guess all that's left to do is say thank you so much to Cheryl and Ali. If you aren't part of Cheryl's Facebook group, please do go on there, have a look at her websites, because as Ali mentioned earlier, she does so much for the industry, and it's all
she is literally the champion
useful.
of livery yards.
Literally, and we've been so lucky to work with her for the last 2-3 years now.
Yeah, 3 I think now. Yeah,
something like that. But we will share some of those useful materials. But do join the group and have a look at the websites as well. But yeah, thank you so much, ladies. I'll also include some information about SEIB in the email as well. We're always here to help with your insurance inquiries too. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone.
thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.